Cyberpunk 2077 is finally right around the corner. We made it. It feels like a really long time and a bunch of delays, but developer CD Projekt Red's next RPG follow-up to The Witcher 3 will be in our hands soon, so we decided to round up some information for you if you haven't been keeping up. Now, there's a lot of information out about this game already, so we tried to distill it all into 10 digestible things you need to know. Let's get started off with number 10 and talk about the vehicles. We're going to mention this a lot, but there are a ton of different ways to approach playing Cyberpunk. It's a pretty in-depth RPG, so obviously you're going to have a lot of options of how you want to play, and that includes the kind of vehicle you drive around town. Now, during a recent Night City Wire video, CD Projekt Red gave us a decent amount of info on the different types of vehicles we'll be driving. There are 5 different classes: hypercars, economy, heavy duty, sport, and executive. First, we have the economy class. These are your basic run-of-the-mill vehicles. Nothing special that got you from A to B. I still think they look cool. But then there's the executive class. These are super fancy and decked out to look as nice and luxurious as they can. These are definitely gonna be expensive. Now, moving on, we have the heavy duty class, which includes tanks and transport trucks. These are some big boys. They're powerful and cause a lot of damage. Perfect if you're looking for like a battering ram. Next up, we have the sport class, which is pretty obvious. If you're looking for speed, this is what you want. You can even mod and tune them to your liking to get as much out of them as you can. Then there are hypercars, which gets you speed, durability. Honestly, these are pretty much Cyberpunk Batmobiles from the way they look. Then, of course, there are motorcycles, and Keanu Reeves' motorcycle company, Arch Motorcycle, is working with CD Projekt Red to include one of their bikes in the game. They've also teased that there will be some other real-life vehicles in the game, and we got our first look, a tease at a Porsche 911 that will be in the game. We can't wait to see what other ones make their way in the game, because this stuff is really cool. Just the designs are incredible to look at. Hopefully they're fun to drive too. Fingers crossed. Now, next at number 9, we got to talk about the story and just the overall world of Cyberpunk 2077, so we're going to talk plot here. Honestly, we don't know too much other than some vague explanations cobbled together by wikis, but if you want to skip all story stuff and avoid spoilers, maybe bounce ahead like 60 seconds. That being said, you have been warned. So like I said, we know you and your buddy Jackie are contracted to steal the Chip of Immortality. Upon finishing the job, you're betrayed and left for dead and left in a landfill where you wake up and find that you are haunted by Johnny Silverhand, the iconic singer of the band Samurai, who is played, of course, by Keanu Reeves. That's pretty much all we know, but there is so much Cyberpunk lore that anyone and anything could potentially pop up here. Like Johnny Silverhand himself is actually from the tabletop game. Cyberpunk 2077 takes place in the world of Cyberpunk, which is, like I said, a tabletop game from the 80s created by Mike Pondsmith. So if you want to learn more about the world or different character classes, corporations, so much inside baseball about this game, there is a wealth of knowledge out there for you. Maybe pick up a rule book for the original Cyberpunk game and dive in if you're that interested in it. All the stuff and the art and everything about it is really cool and interesting, so consider it if you're really looking forward to the game. Now, over at number 8, with Cyberpunk being this big, ambitious game, it only makes sense for it to take place in a big, ambitious world. The game takes place in, like we said, Night City, which is broken into a few different districts, each one of their own look and vibe. First, there's Pacifica, which we've gotten a good amount of info on, and we even saw a whole mission that goes down there. It's a dangerous, gang-ridden area that was meant to be a place for the rich, but it was eventually abandoned and taken over by gangs. Then there's Santo Domingo, which is pretty much an industrial area with warehouses and power plants and stuff like that. There's Watson, which was once a corporate area but is now just a hodgepodge of different cultures, a melting pot of people from different countries and refugees and stuff. Then there's Westbrook, which is where Night City's wealthiest go to hang out and have a good time, and it's all shiny. Finally, there's the Badlands, which is mostly desert and the opposite of a city. It has a Mad Max or Borderlands vibe to a certain extent, and this is where you'll begin your journey if you choose the Nomad life path, which we'll get to in a bit. CD Projekt Red has alluded to the map being explorable both vertically and horizontally. I take that as we're going to get to explore some of the skyscrapers and taller buildings that you see in Night City. A Reddit user actually DM'd the Cyberpunk Facebook page asking about the interiors, and they responded saying, and I quote, "Night City has lots, and I mean lots, of buildings, and these buildings have floors. In a tall building, and we will have many of them explorable, each floor can house a lot of activities." So not only will the buildings be multi-level, but there will also be things to do on different levels. We've all played enough open world games to see a good amount of boring interiors, and it seems like Cyberpunk won't be falling victim to that, hopefully. CD Projekt Red has also alluded that the game map will be a little smaller than The Witcher 3's, but more densely packed. And we are totally okay with that. If the game world is packed with interesting stuff, so be it. Let's do it. Next up at number 7, as expected, the character customization here is pretty detailed. You get your normal stuff like skin tone, eye color, haircut, facial hair, and all that, but there's even more little settings, like you can pick your eyebrow color, and it doesn't have to be the same color as your hair. You can also add scars and tattoos and weird little tweaks like that we have seen. It's all really cool. And yes, you can customize your genitals or your junk. You can remove them altogether or do whatever you want with them. And you can pick your body type and your size and your voice type as well, and you can mix and match around and mess around. You can really just build out a future cyberpunk person that you want. Then like every other RPG, you pick your starting stats as well, which are body, intelligence, reflexes, technical, and cool. Yes, there is a cool status. And you know, I'm gonna dump all my points into maxing that out. And the skill tree does look pretty robust, with each of those previous stats having other trees attached to it with all different skills. Under reflexes, you have blades, rifles, and handguns. And under cool, you have nerve, assassination, sniper rifles. So between cosmetics and playstyle, you can really spend a lot of time building out your character, which leads to our next point, life paths. Another important part of customizing your character. This is essentially your background, where your character comes from. It also affects the game as well. For starters, it determines what district you start your adventure in. So if you pick Nomad, you start off in the Badlands, like we mentioned earlier. It will also affect the characters that you run into, and how certain story-relevant characters will act towards you, or just generally how you'll meet. You can pick the corporate life path, where you'll start out as an agent. You can choose to be a nomad, or you can pick a street kid. We don't want to get too deep into it, because a lot of the stuff that makes them different is pretty unique and could also kind of start to get into spoiler territory, especially if you plan on doing multiple playthroughs, but it's just important to know how exactly it affects the game. From starting positions to different characters that are exclusive to certain life paths, dialogue options, stuff like that. Also, as a street kid, you might be able to talk your way out of certain situations that a nomad or a corpo might not be able to. The three do seem pretty unique, and I'm sure that a lot of players will be doing multiple playthroughs. Now over at number 5, seeing that Cyberpunk 2077 is an RPG, there are a bunch of different ways to play the game, all depending on how you choose to progress your character's skill tree. A while back, we got that preview where we got to see Netrunner gameplay. If you take that approach, you're relying heavily on hacking and stealth, hacking your way through the environment without being seen. You see the player hacking into the weights that someone is lifting, causing it to fail and kill them. Since this is the future, everything is electronic. You see them hack cameras, a vending machine to cause a distraction. Everyone and everything is connected to some kind of network, and once you make your way to it, you're in full control. You also have access to a nanowire, which you can use to attack enemies and hack into them directly. But we also got to see gameplay of a solo build character, one that runs in guns blazing and uses strength and mayhem instead of stealth and hacking. So if you're into RPG style games where there are multiple approaches to different missions depending on your character build, it seems like that's definitely what we're getting here. We're just scratching the surface on it, but we gotta move on. Because at number 4, as with any RPG, loot is a very important part. Let's start with weapons. There are 5 different weapon types that we know of: cyber, melee, smart, power, and tech. Cyber weapons are body enhancements like the mantis claws. Smart weapon projectiles actually track enemies, and tech weapons are, techie, so the opposite of power weapons that are your basic guns. And then of course, melee weapons are melee weapons. Armor, or gear if you want to call it, comes in the form of clothing, all of it having unique stats. In one of the gameplay previews, you see V put on a jacket that boosts their street cred. There's all different types of gear, business wear, streetwear, and some more leisure stuff. There's some more fashion-oriented stuff, and don't forget, like I said before, it all has its own unique perks. You might find a cool jacket that offers up a resistance to a certain element or something. It's honestly a really cool take on the RPG formula. We think, a street kid running around in a full suit of armor doesn't really make much sense, but them running around in a dope jacket makes more sense for Cyberpunk. Gear and weapons come in different types of quality: common, uncommon, rare, and legendary. And like a lot of games today, they're color-coded. There are also different mods that you can acquire too. Software mods and attachments. Software mods are a chip that you install and it actually changes the perks of the weapon, while attachments are like silencers and extended mags, your typical stuff. Between the build of your character and now the amount of weapons and gear, there's a lot of stuff to mess around with here, hopefully. Now down to number 3, side quests. Of course, it's an RPG, so of course there's gonna be more stuff in the world to keep you busy with other than the main quest. Every quest is said to be handcrafted and unique. The main side diversions seem to be street stories that you pick up from fixers around the city. They've been compared to Geralt taking a monster hunting job from the board on a town in The Witcher. A CD Projekt Red studio head said this in an interview, and I quote, "There's a couple of layers. There's a passive layer, which is the vendors, and then there's the STSs, which are street stories. I think there are around 75 street stories. Then there's minor activities as well. The street stories are like little quests. There's story, but there's not like advanced cinematic storytelling sequences so much. They're a way to explore the world and level up your character." According to him, they're all custom built and nothing is randomly generated. Apparently, all of these side quests vary in size, from large scale to very small quick bits. CD Projekt Red has also suggested that you can do side quests and finish the game without the main quests, which sounds crazy, but it's how apparently they're handling different life paths and branching quests and stuff like that. We're just really excited to see how that all goes down. But down to number 2, we have to talk about how this game is gonna run on whatever machine you're running it on. First, we're gonna go over the minimum specs. For the CPU, you're gonna need an Intel Core i5-3570K or an AMD FX 8310. GPU-wise, you're gonna need at least an NVIDIA GTX 780, 3 gigs, or an AMD Radeon RX 470, and you're gonna want at least 8 gigs of RAM. Recommended spec-wise, you're gonna want an Intel Core i7-4790 or an AMD Ryzen 3 3200G, paired with an NVIDIA GeForce 1060 6 gigs or an AMD Radeon R9 Fury. And you're gonna want 12 gigs of RAM. Storage-wise, it's gonna take up 70 gigs of hard drive space on PC, and it's recommended that you install it on, of course, an SSD if you have the capability. There will also be ray tracing support on PC. As for consoles, we don't have too much info, but it's safe to assume that the install size will be about the same. We also know that there will be next-gen upgrades that should be pretty easy to implement, but we don't know what exactly they're gonna do yet. There's probably gonna be a pretty awesome Digital Foundry video on it. But moving on to number 1, let's talk some housekeeping. Cyberpunk 2077 is releasing on November 19th, 2020 on Xbox One, PS4, PC, and Stadia. It will also be playable on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S on launch day, just like that, no hoops to jump through. Like we said, there will also be a next-gen update being made to the game eventually that will take advantage of the new consoles. There are 2 editions of the game, the standard $60 copy, and then a $250 collector's edition. That includes a statue of V, a steelbook, art book, pin set, a car keychain, a visitor's guide to Night City, patches, a world compendium, postcards, digital goodies, all that stuff. There's a lot of stuff, I'm running out of breath, but you're definitely getting a lot of bang for your buck. On the other side, we don't have a date for them yet, but there will be some free DLC, just like with The Witcher 3, some single-player add-on content, and also multiplayer DLC. But nothing is dated yet, so try to contain that hype for future content, but that is Cyberpunk 2077. This is all the stuff we're getting. This is some information to get you caught up. Well, we want to hear from you guys down in the comments. What are you looking forward to most?